All right. Howdy, folks. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late here. Always trying out some new techniques to do this, and you kind of run into technical difficulties sometimes. But welcome to the QMS Bootcamp. I am Kyle Chambers with Texas Quality Assurance. And so if you've not tuned into one of these before, what we are doing is we are taking the material that we've compiled over the last 10 years, what we call the QMS Bootcamp, which is really kind of the guide on how to implement, maintain your quality management system. And we're putting out tons of this content for free in live stream format across YouTube, LinkedIn Live, you name it. So definitely hope you find something here that's useful, that you enjoy. And we're going to jump right into today's topic. Today's topic is all about auditing. And the number one tool you have as an auditor are questions. Whether we're doing an in-person audit, whether we're doing a remote audit, questions are really the primary way of gathering information, at least in a process-based audit. So as I'm talking about this is not doing a deep dive into strictly a paperwork-based audit and a procedure-based audit, which questions are still vital, but this is very much for a process-based audit where we're talking to people, we're engaging, we're trying to learn about their business, we're trying to learn how they maintain compliance. Goodness knows there's no shortage of ways that people do this. So if you want to have an effective audit, questions are your number one tool. So as we go through this today, and this is what we're going to be doing that's a little bit different from normal, is we're going to be sharing the ISO 9001 standard, a few snippets from there, as well as the 19011 standard and a few snippets from there. The 19011 really governs the practices of conducting the audit, whereas 9001's the basics of the quality management system. So let's talk first about questions. Why is this such a big deal? Shouldn't it just be a matter of I ask them for their procedure, they show me their procedure. I look for items on my checklist that I'm looking for. For this example, we'll probably be referring to calibrations and maintenance equipment a lot. So we'll just use this kind of the examples we go through here. So as I'm going through this, I just need to know, do you have a calibration log? How often do you check the devices? What's your calibration interval? What's your maintenance interval? What do you do when there's a defect? These are pretty standard things I need. And I've seen no shortage of checklists where people try to gather this information. The problem is the organization that you're auditing or the department that you're auditing, even year to year within the same company, they're not going to be approaching it in the same manner all the time. You might have new folks that are in there. Maybe the last year's been particularly tough and folks haven't been on top of all of the details like they used to have been, not referencing 2020 by any means there at all. But as you go through the audit, you need to ensure that this really is a process-based audit. So when we talk about process-based audit, we're going to do a brief recap of what's obviously my favorite topic in these lessons is the process map. Process map is we're identifying our inputs, we're identifying our outputs, what are our goals on to get there, and how do we check to ensure that we got there. And in the middle are our process controls. And these are our best practices. These are our process procedures. These are all of these details that we're generally accustomed to talking about. But those are almost a formality of getting from the input to getting to the output. And those process controls are quite different. Now, I think we can all agree that for the purposes of a calibration and maintenance program, we've got pretty much the same inputs, pretty much the same outputs, almost wherever you're at. Whether we're talking about a scanning electron microscope or we're talking about a cheap Mitutoyo caliper, we still have similar inputs and outputs. We've got devices, and we want to make sure that those devices are recording good, sound, accurate, consistent data. Figuring out how to get from point A to point B can be quite different a lot of times. So give you a little bit of a background here. So I myself have been conducting internal audits since about 2009, 2010. I spent about 3 years doing auditing for a couple of different certification bodies for ISO 9001. I've done work for, you name it, 9001, Q1, Q2, 14001, 45001, 1345, 27001. And these principles are really the same across the board. So when we talk about auditing, let's look at the lens of an internal audit. So before I jump too far into my ideas of these things, let's take a look at the standard itself, and let's test some of my technical know-how here. All right, so as we are talking about the internal audit, let's scroll down here. I probably should have had it pre-selected to the location. Let's go down to clause 9.2. Oh, might help if I was on the correct standard. ISO 9001. Let's go to clause 9.2. 9.2 is all about the internal audit. So it says here that the organization shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals and provide information on whether the quality management system conforms to the organization's requirements. And this is something that's often overlooked in conducting internal audits. Is we're not going strictly to the ISO standard here. We are going very strongly to the requirements of the organization. So want to make sure that it conforms to the requirements of the quality management system and the requirements of the international standard. So any internal requirement that this organization has is on equal footing to the requirements of the ISO standard. And we want to make sure that the quality management system is effectively implemented and maintained. Now, that is, after all, what the entirety of our QMS Bootcamp is about, is making sure that you can properly implement and properly maintain your quality management system. So let's look a little bit further here. So kind of understand the goal of the internal audit. The organization shall, now this is one of those words that if you see, it is not meant to sound formal. It is meant, this is an absolute explicit requirement. No way in the world you can get around it. No exceptions, no funny business here. Shall plan, establish, implement, and maintain audit programs. Now, those are quite the grouping of words there. And you really have no way out of having a dedicated process procedure to this, identifying how you're going to schedule, how you're going to conduct it, how you're going to ensure it happens year over year. And this includes the frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning, so forth. So we have to define all of the details about our auditing program. Even if you use someone like Texas Quality Assurance and we conduct that audit for you, you still need to make sure that you as an organization are ensuring that all of the requirements are being met. We want to identify the criteria for the scope of each audit. Very important. We will make sure that we select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. This is the absolute toughest one for small businesses or small teams, is ensuring objectivity. You know, it's very, very difficult to audit work that you're involved in on a daily basis. So ensuring that objectivity can sometimes be a bit difficult. You want to ensure that the results of the audits are reported, take appropriate corrective action without undue delay. So these are some of the basic details of the internal audit. This is nothing we're terribly unaccustomed to talking about or understanding. And the last detail here is retain documented information as evidence for the implementation of the audit program and findings. All right. Well, we have to have evidence. And that's the word that we're really trying to get to here, is all of this boils down to we have to have evidence and we have to maintain that evidence. Well, how do you go about getting that evidence? So it can be quite the struggle sometimes, actually, to get that appropriate evidence from the folks you're looking for. Unfortunately, when you go into an audit, it's very much an adversarial nature. It should not be. With practice, you can get away from the adversarial approach to an audit, but you're still going to run into some folks who see this as an adversarial match, and they're going to fight strongly to defend their work and in whatever manner they've done it. So knowing that as you approach the audit, that will inform how you pose your questions. Now, everyone says you need to have open-ended questions, and this is good, but simply saying, well, tell me about your work. How do you do that? Those only get us so far. And then at the same time, if you go not just, well, how do you do that? But those how questions can become very, very leading. So if you in your mind are imagining, because the last 10 audits you did were this way, that the best way to do this is to have a list on an Excel spreadsheet or on a tablet or whatever it is of here are all of the calibration required devices that we have. And so you might be asking, how do you maintain your list of calibrated equipment? Well, if this is your company that you're auditing year after year, that can be appropriate and effective. But if this is not an incredibly familiar environment for you, you just prescribed to the auditee the proper method as a list of calibrated equipment. Well, maybe they don't have a list in the manner that you're looking for. I've worked with organizations before where they actually don't own any of the calibrated equipment. They outsource everything to come in and be inspected on a periodic basis. So if you come into the audit asking for this open-ended question, how do you maintain your list of calibrated equipment? Well, they're kind of stuck and stammered because they can't quite answer the question in the manner that it's been asked. So this is where the idea of process approach comes in real handy, is when you start the audit, have a brief sit down, say, look, I am here to discuss calibrated equipment, measurement, traceability, things of that nature. I want to understand how you currently maintain the system, and then engage them in conversation about it. Then you want to go take a look at the process procedures, and you might ask them, I heard in our chat earlier that you maintain this with a monthly requisition form. Can you show me where that requisition form is mentioned? And then they're going to pull out the procedure, pull out the form or work instruction, and they'll show you. If they can't show you, those are great chances, great opportunities then to say, well, where's this documented and this is your procedure? Where's this documented and this is what you do? And they might answer, oh, well, it's actually in this one over here or something of that nature. They could, on the other hand, say, well, this is just what we do and everyone kind of knows that. Okay, now we could be looking at a finding here. We could be looking at a finding that they did not document this process properly, but I don't know that I have enough information yet to do so. So the next question might be, okay, well, how do you know that everyone knows to do this? And you could find a variety of answers there. It could be, well, we have a training that we conduct as part of our onboarding program. Great. Here's another trail that you can go down to find that objective evidence you're looking for. On the other hand, maybe it's a small machine shop with only 4 or 5 folks in it. And this could be a little bit of a different story there and pose kind of a different line of questions that we might want to ask. But before I get too far in that, let's go take a look at the 19011, because as you see here, the standard requires for us to take a look at the 19011 for guidance. So let's go do just that. If I can get the cursor over here, and let's take a look in 19011. Let's take a look here at this fun table A.1. Table A.1 here in the 19011 for our internal kind of auditing standards is, well, conducting interviews is our first option of how to get evidence. Maybe completing checklists and questionnaires with a auditee participation, conducting a document review with auditee participation, sampling. Okay, now remote work, it's still effectively the same. We just sometimes lose some of the benefits of seeing the body language there. Without human interaction, oftentimes you don't really have a full without human interaction. But you still conduct a document review. You're going to have questions for folks you're looking for. Again, the key point in your line of questioning is, yes, open-ended questions, but open-ended questions that don't lead to a predefined result that the auditee has not already mentioned. So if they've not mentioned a specific method, the standard you're looking at does not require a specific method, and you have no document information, no procedures or manuals in front of you that prescribe a certain method, it might be best to learn more about the process before going into such a line of questioning. Let's take a look here at another section. We're going to go to A.5. A.5 is verifying information. Insofar as is practical, the auditor should consider whether the information provides sufficient objective evidence to demonstrate the requirements are being met. such as, this is complete, it's correct, it's consistent, or it's current. So objective evidence is another one of these fun auditing words that we have to look at. So objective evidence is best when it is in the form of samples from procedures, samples from records, and such. However, your person-to-person interviews and interactions can help provide that objective evidence. So let's go back to our example of calibrated equipment. So I'll give you a little bit of history of myself. Organization I worked with before, we had these very, very large veneers. And we had standards that were 96 and 100 plus inches long. So conducting an audit there versus others might be a little different. We had a process as well where we would do in-house verification of some of the equipment. There was an entire process for those. So if an auditor were to have come to me in that environment and they asked, who do I send all of my equipment to be calibrated and how frequently do I send it? Well, the answers that I would approach there might be a little different than what they were expecting. And so then when we start talking about, we do our own in-house verification. Again, depending on the assumptions that the auditor has going in, this can be very, very difficult. So as an auditor, you very much want to maintain as much of an open mind as possible. Even when you're staring at the standard that states do X, Y, Z, we want to see how they do it. So let's look at this here. If I were the auditor auditing myself previously, and I was told, well, we do in-house verification for equipment. Well, great. How often do you do this in-house verification? And the answer would have been, well, anytime before a documented inspection. Okay. Then the next leading question could be, well, tell me a little bit more about what this documented inspection is. You're going to gather your information there and continue to go forward. One of the things that you for certain want to avoid is looking at a clause of the standard and asking point blank, do you do XYZ? So let us take a look here back at the ISO 9001 standard and give me a moment here to find my spot, and we'll actually just take a look at this. All right, here we are at measurement traceability. Okay, let's talk measurement traceability. When measurement traceability is a requirement or is a consideration by the organization to be essential to part of providing the validity of measurement results. So already in that first statement, we've got some kind of options and exclusions in here. You'll notice this is not a shall statement. It does not outright say the organization shall maintain. It says when measurement traceability is a requirement or is considered by the organization to be essential. So who might define it as a requirement? Well, it says here the organization might. We could have a customer that might. Perhaps they're just industry best practices that we know about, or other laws or requirements in place. Or, we see this as critical to quality, which again would become an internal requirement. But already it's allowing the organization to define when this is the case. So if I am auditing this, one of my first questions is, when is measurement traceability a requirement for you? Rather than making the point blank assumption that every single device that I see is required for traceability. So calibrated or verified or both at specific intervals or prior to use against measurement standards traceable to international or national standards, when no such standard exists, the basis for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. Okay, so that's pretty fair. Identify in order to determine their status. All right, so this is another one here. Identify in order to determine their status. The typical assumption is that each piece of equipment, whatever it is, some equipment that's used for measurement, is going to have a label on it or a calibration ID or something along those lines. But again, you cannot jump into the audit asking, show me the calibration ID for this. You do have to begin otherwise. How do you identify the calibrated equipment? We know that identification is a requirement. So if identification is a requirement, you have to then ask, how do we identify that what these devices are? We have here safeguard from adjustments, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status. All right. So if we have equipment that is sitting in a lab, static on a counter, the odds of that equipment getting dropped are pretty slim. On the other hand, if we're out in a machine shop or a weld shop or a field site, and we're walking around with calipers and micrometers and various digital tools, the likelihood of something getting dropped is very, very different. So when you walk into that situation, you kind of think to yourself, what are the typical hazards that could cause a problem with the process that I'm auditing? So if we're working in laboratory conditions, the first thing that comes to my mind is going to be temperature and humidity. So those should be some questions that you ask, is not what do you do about temperature and humidity, but what have you identified as risks? Are temperature and humidity a part of that, if that's where you're wanting to go? This is one of those cases where these yes-no questions are okay, but these yes-no questions are not intended to identify a result. Here's the key if you're going to ask a yes-no question. If you're asking a yes-no question, it is for your own purpose of branching the conversation. So in this case, if we have laboratory equipment and I ask the question, what are some of the risks that are associated with this process? And do you consider temperature and humidity to be those? If they answer no, well, now I have a good open-ended question. Well, why not? And the answer could be that the equipment itself has a self-calibration going on. Great, fantastic. Maybe it's the case that extreme weather fluctuations are all that would affect the equipment, that the temperature variations in an office facility aren't sufficient. Great, that's good information. On the other hand, if you say, yes, this is a requirement, well, then I can start to ask, well, what controls do you have in place? And this can lead us down a very, very different path. I would not want to jump in here and ask a question straight from the standard. Great example of a terrible question to ask is, do you have safeguards to prevent damage? Well, they're going to say yes, or they're going to say no. And either way, you didn't get a lot of good information. How are you going to pin a finding to this? How are you going to show compliance or conformance here? So we have to be real careful with these yes-no questions. They are very much targeted, calibrated tools for us to launch into some more detailed information. Okay, so then it goes here. Again, this is just in the measurement traceability of the ISO standard. The organization shall determine if the validity of previous measurement results has been adversely affected when measuring equipment is found to be unfit for its intended purpose, or shall take appropriate action as necessary. Now, this is another fun one, especially if you've worked in a machine shop, is if you only calibrate your calipers or have them verified, which is an option. Of course, we have to have the procedure to prove the verification is still good and that folks have been trained appropriately. This whole other line of questioning there, though, is what do you do? And this is the exact question that I often ask, is what do you do if the equipment today is found to be bad and this device hasn't been checked in 12 months? It's a very, very good question. Now, I have seen auditors ask a very different, very terrible question, trying to get the same result, but a very different, very terrible question that creates that adversarial nature that we want to avoid. Is they would ask, what nonconformities do you document? How do you document the nonconformities? Do you recall the work that was done? And they're making the assumption that it is necessary. And that's the thing about auditing, is you cannot jump into this with very many preconceived assumptions about how their business should operate. It's very, very much an exploratory operation. You want to get in there and learn as much as possible. When you see something that's not right, that's when we get very detailed and very analytical. So, none of this is rocket science. But it is very, very difficult to get our head out of the way that we think things have been done, or the common way that we think things should be done. So when you're auditing, it is incredibly, incredibly vital that you ask a lot of not just open-ended questions, but open-ended questions that will lead to more and lead to more. And as you ask these open-ended questions, you start with this very wide field. So let's look at calibrated equipment, right? Sure, we come in here, tell me a little bit about your calibrated equipment process. What even needs to be calibrated in your shop? And they'll give you a list of some things. Why does that need to be calibrated? They'll tell you a little bit there. Okay. Well, where do you go to get the calibration completed? Do you do it internally? They'll tell you a little bit there. And as you go, what you find is that you're taking this very wide field of possible nonconformities, and you're slowly but surely narrowing that field down till we get to the question we were talking about earlier. What do you do if the device that you're looking at is bad today, but wasn't 12 months ago? Now, if this is an employee-owned tool and he uses it for spot checks as he's welding to get a rough idea, but he himself is not in charge of the final inspection, we've got the final inspection to check these things. Now, this could be an internal improvement. Maybe they're losing some efficiency, they're losing some effectiveness, but if there's a final inspection that's conducted, I as an auditor cannot find anything is non-conforming here. So we go from this very wide field of infinite possibilities of where this audit could go till we very gradually shrink it down to very limited possibilities. And it's at that moment that we are able to obtain the objective evidence that we're looking for. It's very hard, though, to not jump straight for the objective evidence. You don't want to go into an audit immediately asking for their charts. You don't want to immediately going asking for their procedures. You want to go in talking with the people as people. If you jump into the audit talking to people as people, honest to goodness, trying to understand their process, and then at the end of this, we obtain the objective information that we're looking for, the objective evidence that we're looking for, that's going to ensure that you have a very effective, very well documented, well understood audit. But it's also going to ensure that you are not in this adversarial nature with your auditee. And that's the key to a very successful audit, is when the person you're auditing feels comfortable sharing information about their work and their job. It is so much easier for you as an auditor to find the information that you're looking for. So really, guys, that's it for today's episode. It's not rocket science, but we do have to get our head in a very different frame of mind to go in understanding the business, understanding the organization, understanding the process, and we finally narrow it down to those last details of objective evidence that we're looking for. So, hey, if you enjoy this content, if you find this helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, all the same stuff you hear everyone here on YouTube say, but it really does do a lot to help us to know where to take some of the content. We've got a lot of stuff that's about to be coming down the pipe. If you are a small business owner, a quality manager, someone, and you're struggling with getting these things done, maybe you don't have the manpower or the resources you're looking for, check us out online at texasqa.com. We have programs for everything from the comprehensive consultation to just being there to provide a little bit extra resource and help a small business fill that role of a quality manager. So just let us know how we can help you. And look, if you've got a question, you just want some advice on something, hit me up here on LinkedIn, drop a comment in YouTube. I'll be happy to answer your question. Who knows, maybe it'll be a great topic for a future video. So we look forward to hearing from you soon, and y'all have a great day.